He had never even imagined a future like this before, imagining something like he was going back to school at this age, then shown a powerful attack from the sky that then managed to destroy the building below when it landed. The attack came from a man with a sword in his hand. The man's figure was reflected in the eyes of the monster he was now facing. Seeing the figure of the man who was now getting closer to him, the monster then roared loudly, not afraid. The man then chopped the monster's body into several parts using his sword. The man's slash was very strong, making parts of the monster's body cut off. After finishing off the monster, the man then looked back. There were several figures who came to him. Seeing that, a smile was then plastered on his face. They were friends of the man's friends. The man also did not expect to be friends with them. At that time, heavy rain hit that soaked a magnificent castle, and in the castle a fire was seen burning throughout the room. There were 4 figures separated by fire into 2 sides. With one side, a man with black hair was seen protecting 2 girls behind him, while the other side was seen a man with a knife in his hand. The black-haired man then asked the man in front of him why he wanted to stop them so much. The man had already said it, they should not advance more than this. He knew the person in front of him was the protagonist of this story, Taylor McClure. But Taylor ignored the man's words, which had an implicit threat in it. He then approached and attacked him while shouting the name of the man, who was Ed Roth Taylor. Ed looked very calm. Even though Taylor's attack was approaching him, he then cast a spell called Ignition, which then gave rise to a smoldering fire that burned around. But Ed's attack was parried by Taylor. Ed then took out a bow and was seen aiming at Taylor, who attacked him. Ed himself is a third-rate villain character in this story. In the original story, he was destined to be a useless nobody who didn't even appear often in the story. However, a third-rate character seems to have their own way. Ed then changed the direction of his aim, and instead of aiming at Taylor, he aimed at one of the 2 girls he was protecting. They were then shocked to see that. Ed then opened fire, which managed to hit the girl, but Ed's own body was successfully stabbed by Taylor using his sword. But instead of feeling pain, he smiled slightly. He didn't need understanding from others. He would not do it in the manner of a protagonist of the story. Taylor was then angry at Ed's smile that seemed to mock him. Ed would do it in the manner of a third-rate villain in this story. So that he could reach the end of this story, he must survive. In a luxurious room, a young man was seen reading a letter he was holding. The letter contained the sins he had committed so far, such as using dirty words in front of the princess, interfering in the entrance examination of the Holy Sylvania Academy, and so on. While reading the letter, the young man wondered if they removed his name from the family register. He felt like God's fate was mocking him. The young man was Ed Roth Taylor, and soon he was kicked out of the house he lived in. People then talked about it, but there were people who were still afraid of him because of his bad reputation. But his friend told him not to worry, because Ed was not even recognized by his own family. He even got kicked out of his dormitory. Hearing that with a little anticipation, he then asked, would they not see him in the next semester, and said, he shouldn't have cheated on the entrance examination. Now the situation has become very sad. Ed himself can now only sit in the garden while feeling depressed. He feels that this is unfair, because the arrogant Ed Roth Taylor that people are talking about is not him. He himself is a modern human who entered into a game. This game is based on the magic school, Sylvania Academy, his favorite game, the failed swordman of the Sylvania. Generally, when someone enters a game in webtoons, they would be the son of a noble, a genius but bastard clan young master, or a lawless SSS rank hunter. But out of all the possibilities, he was a third-rate villain who was kicked out of the dormitory at the beginning of the game. He had become the worst character at the worst time. Ed then cried out unfairly with the situation that happened to him. He had always lived simply, not even greedy. Seeing that, the people around him then felt surprised, because Ed still said unfair after all he had done. They felt Ed was really shameless for saying he lived simply, while Ed himself could only sit transfixed while holding back his shame. They then walked away. Ed then looked at the mirror. There he was surprised by his stats. He wondered if these stats were real. He attended the magic faculty, but his intellect stat was really pathetic. Even his stamina was too low for a nobleman. Even the peasant NPC had a stamina of 5. No wonder he was only a third-rate villain who appeared in the early scenarios. Even he himself didn't remember much about Ed Roth Taylor's character. He didn't remember what would happen to him later. But then he suddenly remembered something about Ed. In the corner of the ending credits, he became a beggar, like a tramp. Ed really bemoaned his future fate, but at least, He was lucky to be alive. He then could only sigh, and wondered why he possessed Ed's body. He didn't know the reason, nor did he need to find out. He then strengthened his resolve and said he would try his best. Rather than a school, the Sylvania Academy was more like a city with the entire Arkan Mountains as its place. In the northeast of the academy, there was an untouched forest. Ed tried to escape from the gaze of the students, and ended up here after walking for half a day. That was enough to explain the situation he was in. When Ed was expelled, that was the extreme beginning of the scenario. Fortunately, although he was expelled by his family, he hadn't been expelled from his school just yet. This was very important, because in the game it was said that Sylvania Academy was a top academy. If one graduated from here, they could be guaranteed a bright future, and as long as the game setting is still in the academy, he can use the information of the 5 times dedicated players to the maximum. He can live comfortably and better than his previous life. So, his goal now is clear, which is to graduate. But the problem now is the tuition fee. This semester's fee has already been paid, so he only needs to think about the fee for next semester. Ed paused for a moment because he knew how difficult it was to get money with his current situation, and thought, whether with his pathetic stats he could get a scholarship. He could only pray that he would not fail. He then decided to think about his tuition fees later. First, he had to solve the important problem, namely clothing, food, and shelter. How to avoid turning into a bum for the next week. He still had enough clothes in his suitcase, so he just needed to find food and shelter. But the problem was that he had no shelter or food for today. It was difficult to find a job because of his bad reputation. He also couldn't go to the dormitory because he had been expelled. It seemed that he would be in the forest for some time. He was grateful that at least there was still a river nearby. There are still 10 days before school starts. Until then, Ed decided to train himself so that he can compete with his peers. In a forest near the Sylvania Academy, there is someone who chants wind blade repeatedly, which creates gusts of wind around. That person is of course Ed, although his stats are pathetic. But he is still grateful for at least being able to use spells. Even though this is tiring, he himself was also surprised. Because he was exhausted, like he was going to die just from cutting 15 tree trunks. This also made him even more hungry. He felt that this was not very useful. He hated his family for not even giving him a meal before they kicked him out. He wondered if this hunger arose because of using magic. Ed really felt hungry at this time. He then remembered his grandfather's words when he was a child. When hunger struck when his grandfather was a child, he said he ate tree bark in the mountains behind. While enduring hunger, Ed then continued to stare at the tree trunk in front of him. He then decided to boil the tree trunk using the ignition spell. He couldn't be picky now. He had to eat anything while it was edible. After taking a closer look at it, Ed felt that it was like a chicken breast. He then decided to eat it, and as he chewed it, he then felt that he couldn't stand the horrible taste and spit it out. On the 3rd day, after starving for a day and vomiting for 2 days, he drew the conclusion that the wood should be used to build a house. First, he needed to raise the frame to support the wood. He only had 2 hands, but 4 supports were needed. This is not an easy job. Ed himself failed many times, but he still kept trying, until finally he succeeded in tying the frame. Now the frame of the residence is complete, but he knows that there is still a long way to go. He can't sleep in the field, although it is a little unfortunate, but he has no other choice, and the night has now turned into morning, until Ed finally managed to build his simple residence. But he was then surprised when a system window appeared in front of him. His crafting proficiency had increased after doing that work. He was surprised that the crafting system also appeared now. Ed lived as a noble, so he probably didn't know. He was more talented with dexterity than magic. His handiness even reached level 4. Knowing that, Ed then decided to utilize his dexterity stat to make a weapon called Simple Harpoon. After making the weapon, Ed then decided to look for a more decent meal. He had spent 2 days on an empty stomach. As well as doing excessive work, he shouldn't be able to move now, but perhaps it was the feeling of depression that drove him. He wanted to eat meat, so he tried to fish in the river. Luckily he managed to catch some fish. He was very happy about it and decided to cook it right away. A week before school started, he just needed to survive like now. If he could survive until then, he could go through school without much trouble. That's how Ed thought at this moment. Someone suddenly came up to him. Ed was shocked when he saw who it was. He was so busy surviving that he forgot something important. The person who came was a beautiful girl with blonde hair, one of the main characters in the story. but of all people. Ed did not expect to meet her here. He then recalled the scene in the game. There was Ed who was arrested and was about to be expelled from the academy by her. She was the Princess of Fenia, the person who expelled Ed Roth-Taylor from the dormitory. Ed Roth-Taylor is a villain who appears immediately after we start the game, using his status as a nobleman. He hit the main character's childhood friend. But he ended up being punished, not stopping there. With a heart full of revenge, Ed then cheated on the main character's Sylvania Academy entrance exam. But he was caught by a girl who came to take the entrance exam while hiding her identity. She is Fenia Elias Clole, the third princess of the kingdom of Clole. Ed was then immediately interrogated by Fenia, who has an insight skill that can detect lies and conspiracies of the target. Ed Roth-Taylor, who was caught in a pathetic state, gritted his teeth and made many excuses. But all his lies were exposed by Fenia's insight skill. He was then expelled from the dormitory. Everyone in the academy probably hated Ed Roth-Taylor. Fenia then asked Ed, what was he doing here? Ed really had bad luck because he met someone who shouldn't have met. Fenia then realized that the academy had not expelled Ed. Ed only replied that he was also still a student here, but he was still expelled from the dormitory. Hearing that, Fenia didn't want to mince words anymore. She then told Ed to just get out of the academy. She couldn't bear to see someone as shameless as him hanging around the academy. She would talk to the academic department and personally request his expulsion for the crime of committing a despicable act as a student of this academy. For the crime of cheating another student by trying to block his way to a better future. Hearing that, Ed didn't pay any attention to her words at all. Instead he felt annoyed that his fish was getting burnt from listening to her talk for too long, even though Fenia said that she would speak briefly, besides the burnt food being a problem. In any case, this was a life crisis, because this person, Princess Fenia, really had the power to expel him from the academy. Therefore, with a threatening expression, Ed then asked, the sun will be setting soon. Aren't the nobles always guarded by heavily armed soldiers? With an intimidating look, he continued, could a noble princess come to a remote forest like this alone? But Fenia wasn't afraid of that at all, and said that he would regret it if he was going to threaten her because he thought she wasn't guarded. But Ed didn't mean to threaten her at all. He then knelt down and said that he wanted to thank her. Fenia naturally doubted Ed's sudden change in behavior. She then activated insight to prove the truth of his words, but she was surprised, because the skill insight stated that there was no lie in Ed's words. Ed knew the reason why Fenia looked surprised. The Roth-Taylor family that Ed came from was very famous and had great influence, but the Roth-Taylor family used that privilege to exploit the population and run human experiments for research on eternal life. For the main character, it was a family of trash that was destined to be destroyed. People in that family would be imprisoned or executed. However, he was now not recognized as part of that family anymore. He was cold and hungry now, but this was still better than dying. In the long run, this was actually good for him, so he needed to persuade Fenia like this without lying, or else, he would be expelled from the academy. When that happened, this would be game over for him. Looking at the timeline, when around Ed Roth-Taylor was expelled, this time should be about a week before school started. He wondered what was the reason Fenia was here. After struggling with his thoughts, Ed then said to Fenia, by coming here unescorted and wearing simple clothes, this could only mean that she must be completing the class placement exam. Professor Glast's class placement test. This was a test to find the magic bead hidden in the forest. Professor Glast's test was known to be rather cruel. Of course, if it was Princess Fenia, she would aim for the best class, which was Class A. Fenia only thought Ed was trying to flatter her and said that he hadn't changed at all. She felt that she should ask the academy to expel him immediately. But she was then shocked when she heard Ed say, but without his help, she would never be able to get into Class A. If his words were a lie, Ed allowed her to expel him from the academy. Ed continued, if she goes to the lake in the southeast of this forest, there is a small grassy island. There is a giant tree in the center of the island. The tree was called Marilda's guardian tree. There, she would find the present he left behind. Fenia looked incredulous because she found what she was looking for by following his clues. This really changed the impression of Ed in her mind. Ed Roth-Taylor, who from 3 days ago was clearly a liar and a cheater, she still clearly remembered his miserable situation at that time. However, the Ed from earlier was completely different from the Ed from before. Fenia could only remain silent while thinking about it. until finally it came to the time when the class placement exam had officially ended. Professor Glass then told the students to take out the beads they had gotten. Some students then took out the strange objects they had managed to get. Professor Glass was silent for a moment seeing that. He then immediately put them into Class F. The intention of the examiner is worth noting. This exam is not just about finding just any magic bead, Professor Glass said. Those who will enter Class A are only those who find beads that lack magic power. Only 3 people found this type of bead. They are Zix, Lortel, and finally someone who found a bead hidden in the guardian tree of Marilda whose height of magic power was unusual. Professor Glass then pointed to the student. She was of course Phinia. She would now be the top-ranked student in the class because of that. Back to Ed. Ed was still lamenting about his burnt fish. He now didn't even have the energy to use a spear anymore. He was now making a simple fishing rod with makeshift materials. He then thought about the third princess of the kingdom, Phinia Elias Clole. Since she was a child, Princess Phinia was used to flattery and sophistry, which was the reason she sharpened her insight, which led to the creation of her innate ability. No one could escape from her insight, therefore, there was no choice but to give her the real information, but that also led to more complicated problems. The reason that the high-handed Princess Phinia would later be called the Princess of Love was because after facing failure during the class placement exam, she will enter Class F. Then after that it will start to change. However, if Phinia, who had a great influence in the original scenario, found the golden bead and entered Class A, then the main story scenario would collapse. Even if he managed not to be expelled, all the information he had would be useless, then she would be finished. But still, there was still the top rank in the class. She was Lucy Merrill. Ed felt that the future might remain unchanged. Insight will always see the truth. Phinia also noticed an irregularity. Ed was not lying, but this was not a present. Actually, the reason why Princess Phinia hid her identity was because she was ashamed of the special treatment she would get if her identity was revealed. She wanted to prove herself. Just by looking at her bead she immediately knew that it would give her the best results in the exam. But Phinia could not take the bead, as finding it would be something that she didn't accomplish on her own. The title of Princess of Love that she would get in the future was not a skill or stat, but rather a title that she would get for walking the path of justice. Ed had thrown the bait to the princess. Whether it was truth or lies did not seem to matter so much. The princess could always distinguish between the two, although if Ed Roth Taylor really believed the princess would fail the exam, she was sure she could succeed and show it off in Ed's face. However, Ed Roth Taylor did not lie. Because she really could not get into Class A, the princess now could not do anything else. With a feeling of annoyance, Phinia said she would keep an eye on Ed. While Ed himself was now busy fishing, he was very happy when he finally caught a fish. Time passed until finally arrived when the Sylvania Academy began. Ed seemed to live in a place where he had to start running from early morning to get to school on time. He ran as hard as he could, until finally he arrived. He returned to the Sylvania Academy. When the academy opening ceremony was about to begin, the students were seen sitting neatly while listening to the speech from the school and eating the dishes provided. Ed was certainly present there. He could hear the whispers that spoke badly about him. But he decided to ignore it, and began to enjoy his meal. He himself seemed to have finished a lot of dishes by looking at the many plates piled up on his table. His goal now was graduation. The students were now still talking about it, but some of them noticed something different about him. Ed continued to enjoy his meal while listening to the conversations of people around him. He didn't have any ambitions, he just wanted to graduate. There were some female students who were talking about the dessert cooked by the famous chef and decided to try it, and one of the female students felt something strange about Ed. For some reason he felt like a different person. Ed himself hoped that he could go through his school period quietly, and nothing happened. Today was the first day of the Sylvania Academy. Students were seen sitting neatly while listening to a speech from a teacher. However, on that first day, Ed was almost expelled. He himself was currently summoned to the principal's room. He did not expect Phinia to tell the principal about him, although from the way the grumpy old man spoke with a smile on his face, it seemed that Phinia did not say anything bad. He almost avoided it. Ed then decided to be careful so that the storyline would not deviate from the original. Life skills honed for survival, and magic training suitable for a student majoring in magic. To get the best combination of the two, there is no better weapon than a bow. When his life skills become more and more proficient and he can make good quality arrows, he would be able to cast spirits or magic on his arrows, though of course, spirit formula are outside. Ed then looked surprised, when he saw a girl taking shelter under a tree. The girl was named Janica Faylover, a second-year student, as well as the top rank in the class, Genius Spirit Sorcerer. Janica also seemed to notice Ed's presence. She then asked if he was the amusing guy Marilda was talking about. Ed could only stand still hearing that. Janica then enthusiastically introduced herself. Seeing that, Ed confusedly asked how she got here. Janica then asked if he was surprised that she knew about him. This forest was the territory of Marilda, a high-ranking spirit. He heard a lot about it from her. Ed was quite surprised that the ruler of this forest told Janica about him. Janica only said that Marilda was quite nosy. With her attention scattered all over the place, it was obvious that she knew about unwanted visitors. Ed couldn't say a word hearing that. He had indeed killed many animals here. He had also cut down many trees. Ed felt worried about that. Janica then told him to stop worrying about small things. It was the law of nature for creatures in this forest to catch and eat each other. Marilda was also not bothered by such things. Ed looked blushing when he saw Janica, who was getting closer to him. Ed then tried to divert it by saying that he thought even giant wild wolves had soft hearts. Janica suddenly blushed at Ed's words. She then laughed while putting on a sweet smile. Janica said that there was something she wanted to show him. She then showed him a spirit, and asked him if he was cute and adorable. Yesterday she made a contract with him as soon as she saw him. She then asked Ed if he wanted to try to touch him. Ed seemed quite surprised by that and the fact that Janica made a contract with that spirit. Ed thought, if he wanted to be friends with Janica, he just needed to talk to her at the right time. However, Ed then told her that he didn't know what she meant. He didn't see spirits at all. More precisely, he couldn't. Janica was surprised to hear Ed say he couldn't see spirits. Ed replied yes, and said that he came here to find food, so now, he would leave. Ed thought, only by following the original storyline could he gain an information advantage. Janica Faylover, a person who played an important role in the original storyline, was a person he should not approach. Janica could only stare at Ed's departure. She then recalled what Ed said earlier. Just like Marilda said, she felt that Ed was indeed an interesting person. Then a figure of a big white wolf along with a bat appeared behind Janica. No matter how hard she thought about it, she felt that Ed really couldn't see Marilda. Janica wondered who Ed really was. Janica then lay comfortably on Marilda's body. She had tried to be nice to Ed, but he only replied yup. She was a little upset about it, but that didn't mean they wouldn't see each other again. From now on she just needed to find out. The next day Ed then returned to running as hard as he could so as not to be late. The distance between his shelter and the student area was not close at all. He was almost late by leaving at dawn and running as hard as possible. Just by heading to the academy, he did a ridiculous thing that actually increased his stat. There was also a mysterious figure watching Ed who was heading to the academy, but he didn't seem to realize it. He thought, if he wanted to win the scholarship, he had to study more diligently. He wrote on a stone slab using a burnt twig and borrowed a book from the student library. While Ed was trying hard to study, Janica was seen watching him from behind. On the way home, Ed washed his sweaty clothes. For the day, there was also Janica who was still watching him. But Ed's activities for today were not finished there. He had to check if he had enough firewood, drinking water, and beef jerky for tomorrow's lunch. He could only sleep for 4 hours because of this. But that was not what bothered him the most. He then called out to Janica who had been following him. Janica was shocked that Ed was aware that she was stalking him. Ed said, it would be strange if he didn't know. Because he was Ed Roth Taylor, the worst punk ever, and asked why she kept approaching him. But Janica just said that it was just other people's judgment about him. Ed was surprised to hear that. Janica said that she didn't even know him. Ed couldn't help but think that Janica Faylover was indeed this kind of character. She did look naive and stupid from the outside, but she really independent-minded. However, knowing what would happen to her in the future, he couldn't answer her with a smile, because Janica Faylover was the final boss of Act 1. She was the only character who smiled at Roth Taylor. He didn't want to go this far, but, Ed then said, if so, since fate made them meet each other, could she help him? Hearing that, Janica looked very enthusiastic to help him. Ed said, as he could see, he was in a mess right now. He was banished from his family, and he was in trouble. He then asked Janica, could she lend him money. Janica was speechless hearing that. Ed continued, isn't that what friends are for? It's not that he won't return it, he just borrowed for a while, and asked how much money she has, every year. Janica gets a scholarship for being the top of the class, but that's not just a sign of her greatness. Her background is so poor that without the scholarship, she can't enroll or continue to higher levels in this academy. The daughter in a small ranch, Janica, her weakness is money. Janica apologized and decided to run away from here immediately. Ed had expected that. 3 days later, although Ed felt bad about it, but he didn't want to get involved with important characters again. He had to be careful, so that the story would not deviate from the original, and when Ed was about to enter the residence, he was then very surprised, when he saw a girl sleeping there. The girl was named Lucy Merrill. In order of importance, she's a character with an even heavier presence than Janica, the subject of admiration of her classmates and even the professor, a rare genius and the most powerful character of the failed swordsman of Sylvania. Ed wondered why she was sleeping here. Lucy then suddenly woke up while stretching her body. It was because someone was too noisy that she couldn't sleep. Ed himself was still confusedly thinking what she was doing in this mountain valley. Feeling that the person Lucy mentioned was him, Ed asked what he was doing. But Lucy quickly replied that it was not him. While pointing behind him, Lucy said that what had been noisy was the wolf behind him that was the size of a house. She continued to talk to him. Ed looked shocked by that. Lucy continued, the wolf asked him that one day, he could save Janica no matter what. As Ed recalled the incident, he wondered, this won't lead to anything, right? But it didn't take long for him to realize how wrong that thought was. Today was the combined combat training. The combined combat training was actually a mock one-on-one combat training. In order to minimize the danger as much as possible, combat students usually used wooden weapons. Many main characters participated in the combined combat training this time, including benevolent Princess Phenia, golden daughter Lortel, spirit sorcerer Janica, slothful Lucy, and wicked Clebius. Ed could continue to name them, and the list would not decrease. Even so, the most important person was the protagonist, failing swordsman Taylor. Ed wondered what Taylor's next fight would be. He was looking forward to it. Ed already knew the result of this combined combat training, so he didn't pay attention to the fight, because the winner of the duel in the combined combat training episode was a first-year student, just like Taylor, except for one person. Ed looked quite annoyed with Janica, who always bothered him. It was hard to believe Janica ran happily towards him after going through the miserable experience of Ed asking her for money. Unlike Lucy, who belonged to the cat family, there was no doubt that Janica belonged to the dog family. Janica then showed him the list of fights that had been released, but Ed said that he was not too interested. Janica then asked why. Was he not interested in his fight? Ed was immediately shocked to hear that he also had to fight, because in the original storyline at this time Ed Roth Taylor had been expelled. Ed thought about who would be his opponent, and when Ed saw the list of battles given by Janica, he immediately broke out in a cold sweat to see who he had to fight later. While looking at Taylor, who gave off a typical protagonist aura and was waiting for his dual opponent, Ed thought, right now, it doesn't matter who he will face, he just needs to keep an eye on Taylor. Even though it was a world behind the scenes, he had lived as Taylor for a very long time. From the sad bad ending to the true ending that left a deep impression, he completed the journey repeatedly. Among many routes, there was not a single route that was not difficult and hard. Ed had decided to take care of his own life. However, while striking an encouraging pose, Ed said to himself that he was rooting for Taylor. But he was then confused when he heard the announcer continuously calling Lucy. He wondered where Lucy had gone. He also didn't see her at the reserve podium. It turned out that Lucy had gone up to the arena while yawning continuously. The duel this time was between the first-year top of the class, Lucy Merrill, versus Taylor McClure. Unlike Lucy, who looked very relaxed, on the contrary, Taylor had now prepared a horse to fight. The protagonist of this world was born to be a swordsman, but in his life, he had never held a sword once. But with the first slash of his sword, he slashed through Lucy's lightning-quick magic. The spell that she thought would hit the target was successfully blocked. It took her by surprise. As Taylor erased the distance between the two of them, surprised by that, Lucy then attacked him with lightning strike, medium-level lightning magic. Taylor was then defeated by Lucy's magic spell casting reflexes, but Lucy was disqualified for using mid-level magic, giving Taylor the honor of being the first to defeat Lucy Merrill. It was a legendary scene. Ed was very excited when recalling the scene, and finally, The duel between Lucy and Taylor began. When the duel began, Taylor was the first to start the attack. The attack could certainly be resisted by Lucy using her magic easily. But the impact of Lucy's attack was too strong, causing Taylor to be seriously injured. The audience was immediately shocked to see that, while Lucy herself looked a bit bored to the point of making her yawn. The audience still felt surprised that the fight was over so quickly, but they were not so surprised because the one Taylor fought was the top of the class. They also thought Taylor's decision was quite stupid. For rushing towards a mage like Lucy with empty hands, Taylor McClure's life has always been filled with tests, a villager and a failed student, an underachiever who has never gotten good grades since he started school, a failure that no one recognizes, when everyone draws conclusions about his match, in a cruel situation where they pity him. Even in the midst of all this despair, Taylor never lost hope. Taylor then got up while holding a sword with a fiery aura enveloping him. Ed was very excited to see that and looked forward to what happened next. Taylor then rushed quickly towards Lucy. Lucy looked surprised by Taylor's momentum. While smiling widely, Ed thought that Lucy would use lightning magic like in the original story. But he was then surprised, because instead of using lightning magic, Lucy instead used wind magic to block Taylor's attack. Even though his attack was blocked by Lucy, Taylor did not just give up. He still tried to attack Lucy with all his might, but it was in vain. Lucy then made a beast shape using her wind magic, and released it to attack Taylor. Ed was very surprised when he saw Taylor thrown far back. The whole room was instantly silent. Ed was still surprised by the fact that Lucy did not use lightning magic, but wind magic. With Taylor's defeat, the host then immediately announced that Lucy was the winner. Ed still couldn't process what happened, and was shocked by Taylor's defeat. Seeing Taylor, who could only desperately walk out of the arena, Ed thought this would be a big problem. He couldn't let Taylor be in that state just like that. Protection of the wind. This is a continuous magic obtained through a contract with the high-rank wind spirit Marilda. As Ed ran past Lucy, she asked could he give her the jerky now, but Ed just ignored that. According to the scenario, originally Marilda and Lucy were two separate existences. Because Lucy came to him, he ended up making a contract with Marilda and got stronger because of that. The host then announced the next duel, which was between Ed Roth Taylor and Princess Phinia Elias Clole. Phinia was also preparing to face him, but Ed ignored all that and continued to run after Taylor. He thought Taylor should win, raise the sword, and gain courage. However, in the end he lost because of him, because of his existence in Sylvania. When he had seen Taylor's figure from behind, Ed then loudly called him. He didn't know if this had any meaning, but he felt it was better than silence. Taylor was silent in confusion. Hearing his call, Ed then told him that his efforts would definitely succeed, and asked him not to feel sad. No one should make him feel ashamed. Ed thought, if Taylor's heart was really broken, the chances were high that in the end he would have to work hard, so he tried to encourage Taylor. Ed then told Taylor to walk bravely, because he had done his best. It was just that his opponent was not the right person for him. Don't let things like this get him down. There will be more trials happening at the academy. Taylor is the one who has to be the one who faces it, not him. Then a little flashback of Phinia's story is shown. She has been praised by Emperor Clole since childhood as a person born with divine blessings. Emperor Clole was the first to realize her innate insight. Her ability was not something given by an ordinary god. The life of a royal family was filled with endless deceit and conspiracy. From within that dark abyss, Phinia developed this talent herself as a way to protect herself. That's why Princess Phinia could be confident in her ability. There was a disgusting abyss inside the eyes of the royal family that upheld Phinia. Even when she looked through them, she lived as if she didn't know. At the moment when the duel between Ed and Phinia was about to begin, Ed said humbly not to attack him too strongly. Ed had no choice but to stare right at this person. Phinia then replied with the same words as Ed. Seeing Ed in the arena, the students then whispered because of Ed's actions that shouted at Taylor earlier. They just felt that Ed just wanted to mock Taylor, and maybe just wanted to look like a good person by supporting the person he bullied. All the students still looked at him negatively. Phinia, who heard the comments, also thought they were right. Ed used to use his position to humiliate his juniors, and when it didn't go his way, he was caught changing the test results. Really a shameless person, but that was him in the past. Phinia then recalled Ed's behavior, which had changed drastically lately. She wondered if maybe Ed's actions were real. until finally the duel between the two of them began. Phinia then suddenly said that he had confused her. Ed was then confused by her words. While preparing her attack, Phinia said that she wanted to prove her guess from this duel. She then started her attack. She attacked Ed using water magic. Because the magic that Ed could use was wind and fire, she wondered how Ed would respond to this, throwing everything away while exchanging moves. A dramatic battle as the finale, removing the mysterious person from her heart. But of all her guesses, the thing Phinia didn't expect was, Ed didn't dodge her attack at all. He didn't even defend. That certainly made her shocked and confused. Phinia's attack succeeded in making Ed fall. Ed then immediately admitted defeat. Phinia couldn't believe it seeing that. Because Ed didn't even parry after seeing the trajectory of the water ball, the students immediately laughed at Ed. They thought Ed's actions were even worse than Taylor's. They mocked him for being cool but being defeated in one attack. They also praised Phinia for her action. Ed then got up and said that this was a good fight. He had learned a lot. Phinia was speechless hearing that, now that she thought about it. After Ed went up to the arena, he never once made eye contact with her. Phinia wondered if Ed was not interested in duels from the beginning. Shortly after the host announced Phinia's victory, Ed knew now was not the time to playing duel. When dealing with Princess Phinia, it was best to be careful, and not let her influence the scenario, because Phinia was an important person in this scenario. But the person more important than Princess Phinia was the protagonist of this world, Taylor. Therefore, Ed was currently looking for Taylor's whereabouts. But he was confused about where Taylor was, but he was then called by someone from behind him. That person was Phinia. Ed then asked her what she was doing here without a single bodyguard escorting her. Phinia immediately became angry at Ed's actions earlier during the duel. Ed then told her to calm down and only said if she was talking about the duel. He really has learned a lot of things. Phinia certainly didn't believe in that excuse, because she knew Ed didn't even intend to win at all. He was only thinking about the fastest way to get off the stage. She was very annoyed by that. Plus she was already struggling with classes, but the fox-like merchant was only thinking about ways to control the academy. Professor Glass's annoyance did not diminish at all. Plus, the servants were always babbling about the ways of a royal family. Phinia seemed to be venting all the frustration she had been harboring. Ed could only silently listen. She was already dizzy from everything. But Ed was making her even dizzier. Ed was quite surprised by that, and the fact that Phinia had harbored all these frustrations. Ed then grasped both of Phinia's shoulders while calling out to her. He then told her to breathe slowly and please calm down. There was no point in her panicking like this. Ed then tried to guide her to calm down by breathing in and out. Phinia then suddenly fell silent while covering her face using both hands, and asked what happened just now. While holding back feelings of shame, Phinia then told Ed to forget what happened just now. Ed could only agree to that. Ed asked if he could go now. Phinia then said that she had a bad habit. She could ask directly, but she felt like she had to keep guessing and guessing what was on their minds. This was probably because she had stayed in the palace for too long. Ed didn't seem to be able to leave now because he had to listen to Phinia's babbling. He was also sad because of that, because he also had to find Taylor. With a serious look, Phinia then said that she would ask him frankly if he was trying to break ties with his family, because he knew their dark side. While pointing a finger at him, Phinia continued. The reason why he bullied Taylor was because he needed a reason to be expelled from his family. Ed thought that was a pretty accurate assessment, although there were many mistakes. The thought that the Roth-Taylor family had a dark side was true. However, that was something he would investigate later in the distant future. Ed then pretended to be confused and said that he didn't know what she was talking about. Phinia certainly didn't believe that. She didn't want to admit that she was wrong. She then asked what exactly was the meaning of the words he shouted at Taylor. Why did he encourage and support the person he wanted to expel? Did he never dislike Taylor in the first place? Ed thought that this was a fitting question. He then answered that it was because he just wanted to mock him. He only said it because everyone hated him. If he encouraged Taylor, maybe people's views would change. But Phinia could clearly see that Ed was lying. She then told him to look her in the eye and tell her the truth. Phinia then activated her insight. Ed then replied that he was telling the truth. The insight then stated that Ed was lying. Phinia was very upset with Ed's attitude. Ed suspected that Phinia might not have proof. The most important thing, following the initial scenario, was his only hope. Phinia then looked resigned because she also couldn't say anything because there was no evidence. She then allowed Ed to leave. because she knew Ed who had wanted to leave. Maybe there were important things he had to take care of, because from the beginning he kept staring at the door. Ed was grateful for that, Ed thought. This was the first time Phineas showed this side of her, as someone who would affect the initial scenario. She was already involved with many people and events that could give her a headache. This might be his fault for being a new addition to the scenario. Before leaving, Ed then said to her, how could his burden be compared to the burden that the princess was carrying? This might be a little out of line, but she really looked tired, although it was important to pay attention to complicated politics. But she also needed to rest a little. This place was not a palace where she had to worry about every little thing. This was Sylvania Academy. Phineas had lived her life trying to see through someone's lies. But this was the first time someone had really seen through her. Phineas felt touched by the attention from Ed. After successfully leaving Phineas, Ed then continued to search for Taylor's whereabouts. He regretted that he had wasted too much time. If Taylor gave up, then her comfortable life, no, even this world might end, until finally Ed managed to find Taylor. He then immediately called him, but he was then confused about what he should say. A girl suddenly blocked Ed's path and told him not to come closer, with tears in her eyes. The girl then told Ed not to bother Taylor anymore. The girl is the main heroine in this story, Isla. Isla said, Taylor was already struggling even without her. So she told Ed not to bother him anymore. Taylor then got up and suddenly asked him, so you're still at school? Ed was surprised to see that and thought that Taylor had revived, a fighting spirit that never wavered no matter how strong his opponent was. Taylor then came forward while calling his name. A determination was clearly seen in his eyes. Ed then realized, when he dueled with Fiona, his childhood friend and biggest encourager, Isla Triss, immediately ran out the door without looking back at all. She then immediately approached Taylor and gave him words of encouragement. With Isla by his side, Taylor would rise again and again. Taylor then asked him, why is he here and does he have something to do with him? Ed was silent for a moment. He then praised Taylor's skill in using the sword. Taylor didn't quite understand what he was talking about and asked what he was planning. Ed had gone through many experiences with Taylor, and was always with him until the end, so he decided to be honest. He then said that he didn't plan anything. Ed originally thought Taylor was the one who would save the world, so he just had to figure out how to survive. He treated him like an obedient person because he was the protagonist of this game who would do all the hard work instead of him. But at this time, he was relieved. Ed then showed a faint smile, not because the story deviated far from the original back to the original plot, but because Taylor who had been with him for so long was still fine. That was all he needed. Ed then left. The two of them could only stare silently at Ed's departure. The two of them then could only feel surprised and think that Ed was just acting cool. Ed couldn't avoid this. He then looked in a direction. A violent explosion was suddenly created in the place that Ed was staring at. He wondered if it was time. Originally, everyone should have watched this while sitting in the Nail Building, the battle between Golden Daughter Lortel and Spirit Sorcerer Janica Feylover, although this was in a different form from the original. But Ed was sure Taylor and Isla were watching this scene. Ed silently told Taylor to open his eyes wide, because one of the many tests that came his way was the final act. One boss, Janica Feylover, and this time the duel was won by her. The students then flocked to congratulate her on her victory. Janica was the only one from their class who won against the new students. They considered Janica to be perfect because besides having a very good personality, she was also proficient in spirit magic. Janica just smiled and thanked for that. The medical team then suddenly passed by, while the students were congratulating Janica on her victory. Janica herself was shocked when she saw Lortel's badly injured condition. Janica's gaze suddenly went blank when facing this contradictory situation, unlike in the original story. Lucy defeated Taylor, and everything ended with the main character of the combined combat training being Janica Feylover, who became the proud protector of the senior students. Janica already had a lot of friends, but this incident would make things even more troubling for her. But Ed felt that this was even better. He wouldn't meet her on cam anymore. Every time he got involved with the main characters, his head became dizzy. Time passed and it had been 2 weeks since the combined combat training. Without the main characters bothering him, Ed can really study and survive without worry. He now has a fishing net, so the matter of food is quite resolved. When Ed opens his status window, there can be seen Ed's rapid progress so far. He feels like his body is getting better, because of the increase in his stamina stat. But it was still too early to be lazy. He then stepped out of the river in a position still shirtless. but what was unexpected was, nearby there was already Janica peeping at him. Janica blushed when she saw him still shirtless. Janica then asked if he liked being naked. Ed was annoyed by her question after she suddenly appeared here. He was just fishing. After bathing in the river, Ed then lit a campfire to warm himself. Janica then asked what was so good about this place that he always came back here. Ed replied that this was like a very secret base, so he felt like an adventurer and it was fun. Janica then said that she wanted to talk to him a little, and she needed some advice too, but Janica looked a little unsure of her tone. Ed then wondered about it. Because out of so many people, why should it be him? Janica then said he had left first at that time, so maybe he didn't see it, but at the combined combat training last month, she hurt someone. Ed knew what she meant, but he still felt confused, because as far as he knew, her opponent used a medium-level spell even though it was not allowed, but it shouldn't matter to the good-hearted Janica. Janica continued, she kept trying to forget about it, but she felt that maybe at that time she was overreacting. She couldn't get rid of the thought of herself overreacting. Ed then understood. Janica then asked if she should apologize to her, but her friends would definitely stop her. They said she was wrong first, but Ed still advised Janica to apologize if she felt she had to. The fun and cheerful second-year student, Janica, was a treasure to everyone, precious from all sides, so if she felt guilty or reflected on herself, everyone would come forward to encourage her and take her side. But Janica knew that it was good to have someone different by her side no matter what, but that didn't erase the mistakes she had made. Janica felt Ed was great. He never took her side without looking at the situation first. Ed then apologized if it offended her. Janica then tried to stop him and said that he misunderstood. She was not offended at all. Janica thought, last year Ed was not someone like this. Janica is indeed a cheerful and smiling girl, but she is as considerate as the person beside her. Even when Ed asked for money when he was in trouble, he did not show the desperation that people usually show in such situations. Janica felt that this man indirectly told her not to approach, but Ed's side is like that. Janica said, it actually makes her relieved, if everyone in the world is like him. In her eyes is an unusual comfort, and the night passed quietly. The next morning, while walking to the academy, Ed thought that this is a serious problem. The failed swordman of the Sylvania is called a masterpiece, but very few people have seen the ending, especially beginners who always get bad endings at the beginning. For example, if we save a girl during a kobold invasion in the class placement test, we will see Golden Daughter's secret. She then sends someone to kidnap Taylor, and that way Taylor is then killed, in the monster killing training episode. If we skip Isla's childhood friend and form a unit with Golden Daughter, then the next scene is Isla falling off a cliff and dying. That's because Taylor was supposed to save Isla who fell off the cliff. If we protect the Golden Daughter from the fire spirit Tarkan, who was summary by Janica, then Taylor High.Self will be burned to death. Those are some examples of bad endings that occur in the game. Someone then asked Ed politely if he didn't hear her. While sweating coldly, Ed thought that he should run, but the person quickly passed in front of him. Ed then asked how long she would follow him. The person did not expect Ed to grit his teeth and ignore her for that long. Ed thought, of course he would grit his teeth and ignore her. Wasn't it obvious? Because that person was the fourth heroine of the failed swordman of the Sylvania, the only daughter of the prominent business figure Elt Ketchum, Golden Daughter Lortel Ketchum, aka the newbie destroyer. Lortel then said that she wanted to borrow 2 hours of his time.